Hello everyone, it's Friday, November the 8th. This is going to be the first video that I record after the American election, and obviously Donald Trump has won, which is, I'm not a Trump supporter, and I'm a Canadian. So I figure I might as well just say some things about this. I was avoiding making any predictions about this based on astrology. However, I must say that, I wasn't exactly predicting things the other way. If you noticed in my recent astrology videos, I kind of blasted off to Ursula K. Le Guin outer space. I started talking about science fiction books I've been reading and stuff like this, right? This kind of using the device of fiction. I'm kind of taking a detour away from usual astrology videos, or getting involved in this sort of like very straightforward way with the political issues. But I have finished reading my Ursula K. Le Guin book, and there's a bit of a reality check, looking at what has just happened in America, because I have to admit, I wasn't really expecting Donald Trump to win by such a landslide, but I will, and the other thing too is that when it comes to making predictions with astrology, there is this, as far as I'm aware, with horary astrology, if you're going to do a horary prediction, the way it has to work is, as far as I'm aware, is that you need to have a separation between the person doing the reading and a person asking the question, right? So that horary is specifically laid out so that you, in order to perform horary, you have to have somebody who has the will to hire you and ask you a question and request that you do something at a certain time, and it kind of messes it up if it's just you being like, I'm going to cast my own horary chart for myself because I'm interested, kind of thing. So this is and I have done a few horary charts in the past, but I have found that like it's just a struggle in terms of like having a small channel and connecting with an audience, and trying to find people who are actually interested enough to want to ask horary questions, not just for the hell of it, having an actual point to it. But I have done some before, so I wasn't looking at it in terms of doing a horary chart or looking at horary questions. To be honest, I'm thinking about making this rather than just making this about the election. There's this thing going on where we're having another mutable T-square, right? And the mutable T-square, the mutable signs that are affected by this are, we've got Jupiter retrograde in Gemini, we've got Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and right now we've got Mercury and Venus in Sagittarius. And I was just looking at this mutable T-square that was going. And the whole thing is like, I don't mean to like suggest that the mutable T-square on its own is like a cause for the election going this way. But when you're looking for astrological omens, I just noticed that the mutable T-square, if you look at Donald Trump's astrology chart, Donald Trump has Sun at 22 Gemini, conjunct North Node at 20 degrees Gemini, conjunct Uranus at 17 degrees Gemini, with his full moon in Sagittarius at 21 degrees Sagittarius. And the current transits, at the time of making this video right now, we have Jupiter at 19 degrees Gemini in retrograde. So that is just right between Uranus and his Sun and North Node placements. Jupiter retrograde is just getting right up in there with right. So, and you know what? Jupiter is the lucky planet. Jupiter is the one that is like bestows generosity and stuff like this, right? And then at the other time, you've got Venus the other benefic at 26 degrees Sagittarius, which is just 5 degrees off from Donald Trump's moon sign. And so Donald Trump has a full moon in his chart that runs along the Sagittarius-Gemini axis, and we have an opposition between Jupiter and Venus, which is separating, highlighting Donald Trump's full moon, which is just giving Donald Trump luck and support and stuff like that. And if you were to take Donald Trump's Leo rising, look at it that way. Look at how you've got these two planets on. Donald Trump has this Gemini Sun Uranus North Node in the 11th house, which goes with being a government, that kind of level of large scale organization, right? And so his chart works with him being a leader in the government, and now he's getting Jupiter, which is Jupiter is in its joy in the 11th house. Venus is in its joy in the 5th house. And it's like, from an astrological point of view, unfortunately, this when you start, this is how I'm not saying that this is like how you're supposed to do it in terms of figuring out who's going to win an election, but having both the benefics transiting whole sign houses where they're in joy is basically it doesn't hurt anyways, right? I'm not saying that this is the one sole cause, right? But the other thing that I noticed during the election was that on the day of the election itself, the moon was in Capricorn. The Capricorn is the place where the moon doesn't do very well because it's the opposite of Cancer, right? Cancer is the domicile of the moon. Capricorn is the domicile of Saturn. So that means that on the day of the election, the planet that was ruling the sign that the moon was in was Saturn in Pisces. And the thing is, Donald Trump doesn't have any Pisces placements. But Pisces is the other part of this mutable T-square where you've got the opposition between Gemini and Sagittarius being squared by these Pisces planets. And in this context, the Saturn stands for the Senex, right? The old man, And there's something about the politics of America and there's something with this Saturn and Neptune in Pisces at this particular moment where obviously the power of the old man is not so quick to give up to some younger generation at this point. Although it's interesting that J.D. Vance is only a couple years older than me as a vice president. And there's also, of course, this Mars into Leo that just happened. J.D. Vance being a Leo sun. And the Mars in Leo retrograde that we're set to have soon. A Pluto into Aquarius. All this kind of stuff happening. There's some... I might as well just say it, that there is... I'm not going to make a hard prediction here, but it's already happened where there have been a number of attempts at Donald Trump's life in the election cycle. Obviously, that riled Elon Musk up, and he got all, the whole Donald Trump raising his fist in the air. Maybe that has something to do with the landslide victory. I don't know, but I think that it's interesting with this Mars retrograde because a lot of astrologers were predicting maybe not the most smooth. There's going to maybe some sort of back and forth happening around this, but it looks like the way the election went, it's not going to be like a January 6th. If anything, we're looking at the inverse of that situation, which could be, maybe another assassination attempt, right? And I'm just putting it out there, like, this has already happened. It's within the realm of reason that this could happen again. But the idea that the what I'm going to go off here is that on the day of the election, the moon in Capricorn being ruled by Saturn, and there's some kind of, when you go back to before Joe Biden dropped out, it was kind of like you had these two old white guys, and it wasn't even about like policy. It was about who could be a better old white guy. It was like, how many have you been golfing, Joe Biden? How good of a golfer are you? Right? There's something about like there's something about that. I mean, the other thing about this too is the idea of the rebellion against the status quo. And with Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, one of the things that I didn't want to, well, let's just put it like this. Saturn and Neptune Pisces, Saturn and Neptune as an astrological configuration is very closely related to Russian communism, because if you look at when the Russian Revolution happened, there was a Saturn and Neptune conjunction that ingressed into Leo around that time, and then at the time when the Soviet Russia folded, it quit, there was another Saturn and Neptune conjunction. I've gone into this before, and there's also, I could probably do, if I really got into researching it, I could pull out my Cosmos and Psyche here and read the Saturn and Neptune stuff. It's a bit of a bummer though, unfortunately. But there's something about Saturn and Neptune which I feel like, could come off as like a communist revolution, where it is like that energy is not really being tapped into in the same way, but there is a certain current of MAGA-Communism. I don't know if that is part of the influence of why Trump got elected, but there are these certain kinds of there's certain kind. I'm not here to be a political pundit, but there's certain dynamics at play where obviously Elon Musk being aboard the Trump bandwagon he doesn't like communists very much. Most of the rich kind of oligarch kind of dudes probably don't like the idea of communism very much. But the idea with this is that with Neptune, right? There's some kind of this idea of the salvific, almost kind of Gnostic even, right? There's this idea that of a guy that I've called Voegelin, who talked about the Immantizing the Eschaton, right? And if you've ever heard of that idea, Voegelin had this idea that the communist revolutionaries were in some way Gnostic, right? Because they had figured like that there's something about like overcoming religion is the opiate of the masses, and that all the previous ways of social organization were they've seen through the matrix, basically. The communists had seen through the illusion, the Maya of the organization of reality, and that they were there to revolutionize and basically create paradise on Earth, as a kind of like, there's Voegelin. I don't know. I've never actually read Voegelin, but apparently this is what his shtick was that the revolutionary impulse is somehow even if it is claims to be strictly like atheistic and secular and anti-religious, there's some kind of salvific impulse in the revolutionary action to kind of make life into a kind of a paradise on Earth, but Voegelin also made the argument that this is precisely why we shouldn't do it, because by trying to make the world more perfect than it is, we end up doing violence to the world, basically, right? By trying to force things to be great or whatever, to be better, we end up becoming tyrants or whatever, right? And this is where the whole idea of immatizing the Eschaton comes from Voegelin's philosophy. And with Saturn and Neptune, there's some kind of like the way that you've got Senex, the old man, and Neptune, like the cult figure. A lot of people have talked about how Trump is a kind of like a cult leader or something, right? Or that there's a certain kind of like cultic belief in him that is more powerful, because like the idea, if you like, as far as the like Kamala did a pretty good job on the debate, right? Like whatever there's not like the idea that there's some principle going here that's not completely rational, which is maybe doesn't go with the whole communist thing, because the communists try to make a argument for like completely just a rational argument, right? There's some kind of like thing with the but there's still this sort of like dreaming, like this, we're going to create a paradise or something like that, right? There's the other thing. I think there's something going on here too, where it's like the Saturn being the Senex, the holding on to the past, right? Saturn having Chronos, doing with time, doing with old age, doing all that kind of stuff, and the idea of not just Donald Trump, but also Robert F. Kennedy Jr. This is specifically something that I find very interesting, because like I have not said anything about the election so far, and I'm just recording this video now because I'm just taking some time to let it all kind of sink in, and sort of, I think one of the things that that seems a little bit odd about this is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Recently joined forces with the Trump movement, and he's a character that's really not taken seriously by the political establishment, and that he's basically cast as being a kind of like anti-vaxxer kind of guy. And there's something about, like, I mean, obviously I'm making an astrology video, and this is first of all, this is a contentious issue. I'm just going to admit it. And but I'm personally, I'm not completely against the anti-vax movement. And I am a person in my own life. I am a guy I have a disability, and I have to admit that as a person who receives disability benefits, who's on disability, who has or whatever, like, that's how the government deals with me. There's a certain degree of fear and concern about fascism and all this kind of stuff, or about maybe there'd be prejudice against me or whatever. But like, underlying this, it's a complicated issue, because in my own life, my own socialization and all this kind of stuff, first of all, my dad was a chiropractor, and I've always had a little bit more exposure to different kinds of alternative healthcare practitioners and stuff like that. My dad passed away back in 2013, and he was not alive for this whole rise of Donald Trump. And like, it's just kind of funny to think about my dad, because he was like, there's all these kind of old baby boomer guys I think with my dad, not just my dad, but him and a bunch of his friends and his, different relatives and stuff like that, people that aren't alive anymore. There's this whole generation of old dudes that just aren't around anymore. And it's kind of like kind of anachronistic to think about them in this political climate or whatever, where you've got Trump going into his second term and all this. but like there's this kind of idea of like the shifting landscape where at one point in time, like my the idea of socialism and public health care and support for social services, and but being like there's this kind of way that everything's been coded where the I don't really know where I fit in, because the left wing, or at least what you see represented in the media, has become very, very coded a certain way, being very rational and scientific and all this kind of stuff, and quick to dismiss people like RFK Jr. as being a bunch of quacks and all this kind of stuff. However, I don't know. I'm dealing with my own health stuff since COVID, and it's a kind of a point of tension, right? Because there's a point of tension because for a number of reasons, in that in my living situation, I'm currently living with my mother and my sister, and there's certain things about the other house. Whenever it seems to me like I have this pattern that whenever I'm not living with my family and I'm living with roommates, I'm living in a different circumstance, I tend to have this pattern of attracting roommates who are kind of like the people who would be like maybe described as hippies, maybe like the kind of people who might work at a grow op or something like that, maybe like the kinds of people who have kind of like unusual beliefs about being like anti-government and kind of anarchistic and stuff like this. I mean, I don't necessarily go intentionally seeking these people out, but somehow I just like, if I'm this is just kind of where I end up, and I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with these people or not about everything, right? But I have noticed this tendency of like the kinds of people that if I wasn't living with my family, the people that I would tend to have for roommates, tend to go in this direction of being like the RFK Jr. or this kind of like, which I think if you turn the clock back to like the 80s or the 90s, there wouldn't have been this stark sense of this kind of stuff being coded as inherently right wing or something like that. But there's something about how this kind of liberal centrist establishment really just doesn't take RFK Jr. seriously. Really doesn't take like now. But the thing is, it's awkward for me because like I do. If I go into a vitamin supplement store, it's like half the time they have weird like pamphlets they're giving out, which seems like a bunch of like right-wing propaganda that I wouldn't agree with. And so it's like kind of like as a person, like if you're a person who's like a alternative healthcare practitioner, and you're and I agree with you enough to support your products even if I don't agree with your politics, but I walk in the store and you're waving a bunch of shit in my face that makes me be like, why would I want to support you if you're like, like I have to go to the vitamin store and some guy's got like a bunch of like paranoid conspiracy theory stuff written on the side of his van. It doesn't make me feel like I'm like, do I really want to shop here, right? Like or like people who are I don't know, or like even RFK Jr. has been like, I was kind of looking at his page the other day, and he's got all this stuff against what he's calling carbon fundamentalism against climate change or whatever. Like, and there's this weird, like, it used to go together, right? Like you had a bunch of people who cared about the environment, who also cared about, let's say, eating health food or something, or being healthy about their diet habits, or being like, I'm gonna have macrobiotic diets and all this, and now it's just been turned into being like, so like the people who are interested in healthcare think that the government is a totalitarian control regime that's trying to exploit them, and then the people who care about the environment think that people who are who are skeptical about certain about stuff like scientism, right? About like I have to just say that like I'm not. There's something about like taking, I don't know. I basically feel like I get put in a situation where I end up living with roommates who are so far extreme in this direction that it creates that kind of like, I can't help but feel a bit of friction that like maybe I should go the other way, but then my family is so far in this other direction that I don't really there's this funny conflict that comes up where my mom was sitting at the dinner table the other day, and she was like looking at her phone, and she started being all like, "Oh hey, you know who's coming to town? Who I really like to see? Richard Dawkins. Oh, I love Richard Dawkins. I really like the way that Richard Dawkins is he's like really into science, right? And he doesn't believe in any of this like funny religious crap, like where and it's like Richard Dawkins is the kind of person like." I ended up watching a interview or like with Jordan Peterson had Richard Dawkins on his podcast, right? The same guy, Jordan Peterson, also had John Restad, the conservative guy who ran. Jordan Peterson also had Elon Musk on his show recently, and Jordan Peterson had Richard Dawkins on to debate the whole religion thing. And Dawkins was saying that like, he really doesn't care about like looking at religion as a kind of allegory or like the idea of poetry, right? The idea that these things are like symbol. They're not. What Dawkins cares about is like if you had this thing about like the Cain and Abel and those kinds of biblical stories, did they really literally actually happen, right? And as far as Dawkins is concerned, he's just like there's this. If you think about it as a I'm into synthesizers, right? I'm into modular synth, and if you think about like you're producing a track, right? You've got a filter that a low pass filter, a high pass filter, a band pass filter, right? That like it's not that the literal historical factual reality isn't relevant, but it's like there's certain people that are just kind of like they experience reality as if it's like this bandpass filter where you've just got this like one thing everything else is omitted so that they can like focus on this one frequency that's coming through. And it's sort of like, well, that's not wrong to be like, it could be very well be, there's a lot of argument that Christianity is entirely a fiction, that Jesus Christ was not ever one, like there could have been a movement of people who held a certain religious belief, and then after the fact they codified that into a story where they had this one guy representing their religious movement, but that guy is a fiction, he doesn't actually exist, right? There's suspiciously trying to act like, I'm not going to nitpick this one, but it could be that the entire Christian religion is a fiction, but if you are only approaching it from that level, there's a certain other things which are like, whether it's a fiction or not, it doesn't really matter, right? But there's something about how it's just can become bizarre because it's sort of like it feels like being torn apart in these different directions that are also, if you try to turn it into like a stark polarization, it doesn't make sense a lot of the time. And one of the things about this, I might as well just get into it, right? Is that the world isn't organized into this convenient polarization where if you're either on one side or you're on the other side. And what I find interesting about this is I find that the issue of like scientism versus religiosity or spirituality it's interesting in my own personal experience, because what I found was that there's some common thread in my recent before I moved back into my parents' house recently in the post-COVID years, I was living in Nanaimo with a guy who was he said he wasn't a Trump supporter, but he was posting a bunch of Donald Trump supporting shit on the internet at the time, and seemed to represent a political view that was basically in line with this whole MAGA movement. But of course, we're Canadians, right? So I've recently become aware there's this, from watching the horseshoe theory, of course, that there's a maple MAGA, is what they call it. So I have had direct experience being in close living quarters with maple MAGA people, basically, right? And the whole time, obviously, there's a bit of friction. There's not my I am probably close. My family has more of a style of always being left wing. And one of the things recently in BC, we recently had a provincial election where our leftist NDP government has held on to power, thankfully, and this has helped to sort of like, it helps to soften the blow of this American election, because, it was a pretty close race here in British Columbia, and we could have lost to the Conservatives, but we didn't. And so I can feel comfortable as being, I may not be 100% enthusiastic with, politicians are always going to be politicians, but I am, as an NDP leftist, to have our local victory in where we can vote, and feeling at least like I may not agree with my family about everything, but enough that I can feel like I'm not like in this conflict living somewhere where people have totally opposite political views, right? But there's nonetheless this funny thing about the idea of science and religion and all this kind of stuff, where what I thought was interesting is that J.D. Vance, right, when I was living with the Maple MAGA people, at the time, I don't know if this guy still has the same girlfriend as this was a number of years ago, but at the time, this guy was dating somebody, and who was trying to say okay, obviously, you don't have the same politics as us, and you don't really, but you should. She was trying to make the argument that I should try watching the movie for Hillbilly Elegy, right? Which is the movie made after the book, or reading the book, which is probably, and Hillbilly Elegy being the J.D. Vance thing. And these were people who are not, I think it's, to be honest, I think most of this influence came from the fact that these people were both Albertan. They're originally from Alberta, and they had moved over to BC, but the association with Alberta meant that they all had family that was working in the oil industry, right? And most of the Canadian Maple MAGA movement is basically just people who are pro oil and gas, and who basically have their families' wealth is very much tied into working in the oil and gas industry, and they basically take progressivism as being a threat. But there's also it's confusing, because at the same time, the Maple MAGA people were voting for the Green Party, so they're also environmentalists. So first of all, there's this kind of immediate friction where, and this is the whole kind of thing, is that you have to understand that people, just because people are, there may be these internal contradictions that people don't realize. That there could be people that post links where they sound like they're in support of Donald Trump, say things that defend their family members who work in the oil tar sands, the oil patch, and then they might go out and vote for the Green Party because they live out in the nature, and they like trees, and they have this sort of they want to go foraging for mushrooms, and it doesn't it's not really rational, right? It's not like They might be like, you know, I have this thing where instead of using vaccines, we're going to use like natural folk medicines and, you know, just take a lot of mushroom supplements and stuff like this. And we're going to vote for the Green Party. And then, but, you know, don't harsh my cousin who's working in the oil patch. You know, it's like, it's kind of like, it may not necessarily be, and then, but they're like, there's this kind of thing where you get like redneck hippies that where if you listen to the Grateful Dead, you can sort of understand that there's this sort of like there's always been this place where the hippie and the redneck kind of like blur together. You're playing bluegrass and then the bluegrass turns into psychedelic rock, and you're in that kind of zone, right? And in this zone, you don't know, like a person who supports Donald Trump could also maybe flip over to the environmentalist movement and vote for the Green Party, or like you don't really know what's going to happen. It doesn't necessarily make sense, right? But there's one of the things that I found was interesting was that the people who are like this, even if they're trying to say like you got to get into the hillbilly elegy stuff to understand where we're coming from. That these people are really into. There's this like Southern religious thing, which is like it doesn't really make sense because if you can't lump everybody together like this because you could have all these people who really just don't like religion because they feel like it's like, oh great, some, you know, authoritarian daddy is judging me, telling me I'm a sinner, telling me I'm not supposed to live my life like this, making me feel guilty about things. Or like there's a whole bunch of really wacky religious people on Vancouver Island, and who might be uptight about LGBTQ stuff or whatever, you know. And it's like that these are not necessarily the same people who are. I don't know. It's like you can't just lump people into this category. It doesn't really make sense, right? Like you can have these people that are completely do not vibe with like repressive religious fundamentalism, or like being anti-abortion, or being like anti birth control, or being like, you know, like trad wife. It's like there's something about it where it's just like there's this whole bunch of people that get lumped together into a voting block that vote a certain way, but like Donald Trump doesn't like. So there's this kind of like, you know, like the Project 2025. I don't know. Maybe this is just a long ramble, but what I'm trying to say is that there's these certain things where I kind of feel like I don't know. I feel like I'm always in this sort of situation where I have things to say, things to express myself, but I tend to be like always either in some kind of friction with my family, or if I have roommates, friction with my roommates, or that it's always kind of like there's always going to be some kind of like, even if somebody shares your political views, they're going to have some other reason they don't get along with you, or that I feel idiosyncratic in my position to things, right? But and maybe this is a long kind of rambling just reaction, but there's something about RFK Jr. that I'm at least interested. It's like I will see how this plays out anyways, right? It's funny anyways. Like there's something that I just get from all this, that the mainstream, I don't think the mainstream liberal establishment that doesn't take people like RFK Jr. seriously, who will completely dismiss him, seems to be completely at odds with the reality of a whole bunch of people that would vote that way and elect him. And then the fact that he's actually in power with the Trump team and on board with Elon Musk, the tech bro, and that there's like this weird, it's just to say, the current, there's like going into the first Trump election, you had people like Steve Bannon, right? When you had Steve Bannon and Mike Pence and all, and you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and all those people, right? Like we're in this, or I don't know, like we're in a complete. There's just funny, this idea of where we're at now with RFK Jr., Elon Musk, and JD Vance, and I'm just trying to like put there's some astrologically. I'm making an astrology video here, so I'm just gonna like. There's some other thing that I noticed that I'm just gonna comment on. JD Vance, born the 2nd of August, 1984, Sun in Leo, Moon in Libra, Saturn and Mars in Scorpio. JD Vance does not have, well, he does have Neptune in Sagittarius, which is being squared by this Neptune in Pisces right now. So it's a Neptune square Neptune transit for JD Vance. And there's something about, what I just thought was interesting is that you also look at Robert F. Kennedy. Oh, this is an RFK Jr. Oh, well, hold on. Is this the one, is this the right RFK Jr.? Oh, yeah, it is. This is RFK Jr. He was born January 17th, 1954. He has Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Cancer, full moon on the Capricorn Cancer axis, and he also has Saturn and Mars in Scorpio. And what's interesting is that you've got the Saturn and Mars conjunction. This is very similar to like the age gap between my parents and me, right? That my parents were boomers, born in the 50s, and who had me when they were around 30. And so there's this kind of age gap where like JD Vance is like the young millennial generation and RFK Jr. is the boomer. But what's interesting is that they both have the Saturn Mars in Scorpio. And I'm just going to put it, I don't know, this is just something that I noticed. They both have Saturn, Mars, and Scorpio, and there's some kind of like resonance. I can understand my old Maple MAGA roommates. I don't want to give it away, but I put it together that like my housemate is probably around the same age as JD Vance and probably also has the Saturn, Mars, and Scorpio. And that there's something about this particular signature that seems, Saturn and Mars and Scorpio seems to like go with this whole issue around poverty and around sexual politics. And have I even brought up the F word of fascism yet? But there's some sort of unconscious sexual politics around all this where, that has to do with birth control, that has to do with parenting, that has to do with women's rights, that has to do with divorce, which has to do with religious traditionalism, and Neptune being this sort of like salvific, idealistic thing to like everything's fucked, but we've got this thing we can hope for, that we can believe in, that we can like, we have this fallen world, but we can bring ourselves back to the Garden of Eden if we just believe that these old white guys will help us make America. But this is also kind of funny. There's something about RFK Jr. that I just want to put it out there that is a bit of a like I don't know who watches my videos, but I know that some astrologers, the wellness industry, right? There's a whole industry around like health and wellness and natural health care and all this kind of stuff that I'm not entirely opposed to, and that I feel there's this distortion that happens when people have these really rigidly scientific attitudes that I'm doing astrology, which you have to be a little bit more open-minded to do astrology in the first place. But the idea that well, I don't know where I'm going with this, to be honest. I'm not like I don't want to make it personal about the Maple MAGA housemates. I'm not going to say personal things about them, but it gives me an insight or a view, anyways, into what people are like who would be inclined to vote like this. But then also the fact that these people could. It wouldn't be that hard to get them to vote for the Green Party or something like that. Like, I think people like the funny thing about the United States is that for one thing we're in Canada here, and in Canada we're not so stuck on this two-party system. We have more of a political multiplicity in Canada. In the federal politics, we have the Bloc Québécois. You know, we have instead of having we have a left-wing party, we have a right-wing party, we have a centrist party, we have the Bloc Québécois, we have a Green Party, we have a populist party. You know, like there's all these. We have room for a multi-party system in Canada where people that instead of everybody just getting funneled into voting for like MAGA, you have the opportunity that these people could get siphoned off and vote for the Green Party, right? You could have these people being your enemies that you go to war against, or else you could you could redirect this stuff into something that's maybe more positive, or you could find. But like it's funny because it's like I just get the sense that at one point in time this was more. It wasn't coded the way it is now. It wasn't just being like, oh, it's like this is why it's like it's an anachronism to talk about my dad being a chiropractor. Because nowadays when you think chiropractor, you think, oh, you must be into like RFK Jr. He must be a total quack. He must be like, you know, an anti-vaxxer. Because this is what chiropractors are like. Or that if you like, you know, if you're into this thing, you must be this way. If you're into that thing, you must be this way. And we have these like everybody fits these like rigid stereotype things because, but that's not actually how it works. It's more complicated than that. And but I think, anyways, I don't know. This is maybe a mess. Maybe I'm just having my first honest reaction to this whole thing, and it is. I am thinking primarily about this Venus, Jupiter, Saturn-Neptune grand a mutable T-square, which has this thing about the multiplicity. The mutable is the most multiplicity sign, and you've got like. I'm at least having the looking at the whole thing going on is not just being just about Trump, but rather about a whole multiplicity of different factors. But I'm not entirely comfortable with it. I'm not entirely on board with it. But there's it's like the strange polarization where it's like you've got. I find RFK Jr. a fascinating character because he's come to represent this quality of like you can't talk about this stuff. It's like talking to a brick wall, right? It's like you got people that are just kind of like we're not going to even admit this guy exists. We're not going to even admit these people have any degree of validity at all. And then these other people are just carrying, you know, they're carrying on undeterred in the direction you don't want them to go. And you know, there's just like there's no dialogue back and forth. There's no like conversation. It's just kind of like this kind of it's become fractured in a way that people are going to go this way and then people are going to go that way. They're just not going to talk to each other unless we can get them all to team up and vote a certain way in this weird multiplicity that doesn't make sense because you've got like, you know, it's like the whole thing about like, you know, being religiously conservative, but being also, you know, having your inherent stuff that runs up against what a religious conservative person would be like, and somehow finding oh well, you know, we can all like it's a kind of a joke, like Trump holding up the Bible. Like nobody takes that seriously, but enough people do that they're all going to vote for him, right? There's some kind of like there's a kind of inconsistency in the whole motivation that kind of just like balances out as this is what we're going with, but it's a kind of a mixed bag as well, right? And it may go back and forth. This is sort of like this kind of mess of mutability of going back and retrogrades and all this kind of stuff, right? I don't know. The other thing too with that I haven't got into, I mean, is like RFK Jr. and it's kind of funny, like taking the MAGA slogan and making it into MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, which, again, there's this whole thing that I have to admit that I feel I am a little bit sympathetic in the sense that I am the kind of guy who, if I had the choice, I would try to, buy healthier foods, eat healthier. I'm not that big of a fan of being dependent on pharmaceutical drugs my whole life. Or like having, like, sometimes people have a faith in doctors that is kind of, like, I'm not saying don't trust medical science at all, but sometimes people, like, it seems like people kind of attribute more, like somehow we have these people that are just sort of these like magical authority figures who just have it all sorted out. They know, and you just have trust that these people know what's best, and they'll take. And it's sort of like there's some kind of like the way that most people feel is kind of like they don't want to just like give all their trust and support over to some medical authority like daddy knows best. They want to question things a bit, or there's a more holistic way of looking at things, right? But then the whole thing is like, does going the granola holistic health, natural health route make you into a fascist, right? Why is it being like into being like dull health and wellness and taking care of the environment? Why does that make you a fascist, right? Or there's this whole thing about like totalitarianism. Is totalitarianism a vaccine mandate? Or is totalitarianism a slogan that says make America healthy again? Which is, I have to say, it's kind of funny because it's like, well, I mean, if you're going to make America anything, healthy is not a bad thing to make it. But by conveniently, it's great, right? Because you just go to change the G to an H. It's like the alphabet just moving up a level. But there's something about the make because making great. Making some, like, we're gonna make this thing great, right? We're gonna make this thing healthy. What does it even mean to make something healthy, right? It's sort of, there's a sort of, and this is, maybe it goes with this Mars retrograde in Leo, because there's this idea of the force, right? Of like, which could be like the strength card, right? The woman who has the lion, who is like, you have a gentle kind of strength, right? You have to tame the lion gently with a kind of like less is more approach. If you try to make the lion, you try to force the lion too much, the lion might bite your hand off, you know what I'm saying? But there's this idea of like, and the idea of when we're talking about health, right? It's kind of funny because I just can't help thinking about this. Like, there's an Adam Curtis documentary. I think it's one of the it was one of the subchapters to The Trap, maybe. But one of the subchapters is called "We Will Force You to Be Free," right? Which is like, and this idea, the American idea of like liberation, right? Like about how, I think if you go back to like arguments for like, the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq, or like, against there's all this stuff about like these poor people are like, they're foreign countries, they're like dominated by these tyrants, and so we're going to go to war there to liberate these people, right? These people are enslaved, they don't even understand, but after we blow their country up, and they will understand what we did was best for them. They're now free. We've liberated them. We've also liberated their oil and their natural resources, and we've liberated. We have these territories that used to be concentrated, but we've liberated them. They're free now. They're free for the taking, right? We will, or like this kind of thing about like being healthy, about like, it's like being forced into gym class, right? We're just going to blow the whistle on you real loud. You're going to be healthy whether you want to or not, right? And what does it even mean to be healthy, right? I don't know. And like it's kind of also kind of funny because like there's these kinds of like contradictions. I don't know. Like at the same time, it's kind of funny because I also see Albert Camus trending, memes about Albert Camus, about which I think there's certain people may be playing off of the idea that Albert Camus is really into the absurd, right? And the idea of freedom, right? And there's this kind of thing, American freedom. What does it mean anyways, right? The American ideal of freedom. And are you free to be unhealthy? Do you have the liberty to just be what if you want to have your American, junk food? If you want to have your American what if you're what if I want to have high fructose corn syrup? What if I want to have red dye in my food? What if I want to have, what if I don't want to go, be exercise? Am I free to be fat and lazy? No, we're going to make you healthy. We're going to force you to be healthy. It's for your own good. You'll thank us later. So thanks for watching, everybody. Good luck to all my American followers. My condolences. Long live the new flesh.